All right, so I'm Megan Lords with Bitcoin Not Bombs. I'm here with Cody Wilson. You give a very interesting talk. I thought it was interesting.
Thanks, appreciate that.
Here at Freedom Summit. Could you kind of go into your evolution of your personal philosophy?
Yeah, I don't know if I have like a systematic like worldview or anything per
Maybe
se.
like what you started when you first started kind of looking into the world and establishing what you believe and how
Okay.
that's kind of changed.
I've always been fascinated with Lenin and the October Revolution, the experience of communism in Russia, the legacy of Marxism, and post-Marxist thought. And the more that I thought about these things, the more like, obviously some of it was not very useful. And so then I entered college and actually got an exposure to classical and neoclassical economics. And I was persuaded about a lot of the truths and like the outlook of the Austrian school. And then I acquired like a very libertarian temperament. I was enthusiastic about Ron Paul and all these things. And then I discovered Hoppe, and that was a good moment for me, And I was like, okay, yeah, all right, anarchism. So I went back and saw like Proudhon and all these guys, Bakunin, and kind of felt out everything that was going on. Found a couple of like post-left anarchist readers and stuff, and try to like come up with a dialogue and just come up to speed with everything. And then I guess now you could say like all the things that I find good in the world are like Nietzschean illiberal ideas. Like the only things worth pursuing are because they're illiberal, because they're not humanitarian or like an advocacy of human rights or something like the interruption of the state and the plans of the state, like the dislocation of grand, I don't know, policies and then ultimately the preservation of like the distance that separates us.
How does that play into Defense Distributed and the direction that you wanted to take that?
Kind of like what I said in my speech at the end of my speech was the first time I really put it this way, but Defense Distributed is the self-negation of Defense Department. The idea is that, military access of arms to the people, which is this kind of erosion of the idea of military as a specific, explicit, separate class from the civilian. No, military access to the civilian. Well, then this kind of negates the idea of the exclusive military as like the enforcement of the state apparatus. And then kind of disqualifies and disintermediates it. So there was like, that's its theoretical kind of aim, but in its practicality, okay, well, we put out some rifle receiver files, some magazine files. Those are somewhat practical. But then we put out the pistol, and the idea was to kind of create the id machine. Like you could, by looking at the pistol, assume and kind of like project a much more terrible future than you had imagined before. Oh my God, the people will have access to guns through like the distribution of manufacturing. And it was a way of interrupting a very public ideology, like society's ideology of how the future was going. We wanted to do it in the media.
Yeah, and the media totally, I really loved reading how the different ways they would kind of spin what you were doing and how they made it out to be incredibly dangerous and this is so disruptive and people can't, be printing their own guns.
Right.
That's so radical. It's so unacceptable. And I mean, I really enjoyed it because I knew exactly what you were doing and they totally fell for it. Like they totally fell for like their overreaction was just so interesting to watch, and I'm the type of person, if people are like, well, what's the limit? Like, how, should the people be able to have nukes and stuff like the government? I'm like, absolutely. I just say yes. I mean, just keep it short and simple.
Why not? Yeah, no, why not?
Why not? I mean, they can use them on us.
Look, it's a huge question, but I think it's a bit, even that, posing the question that way is disingenuous. When someone poses it to you,
right,
should people have nuclear weapons? Look, talking about WMD is different from talking about Category 1 munitions. Mm-hmm. The American as a rifleman is an important like discursive concept, political idea, which is softly kind of like overlooked and put away in our current political discourse. I wanted to, in many ways, like return to one of these original uncomfortable ideas that the people will have access to the weapons, and there's kind of nothing you can do. And then too, a lot of our techniques relied upon, like Debord's theory of the spectacle and everything. Like they can't help, these liberals in all their fascination and all their opprobrium, but they can't help but talk about it. And this is, of course, the way of achieving its maximal distribution and press.
So you made an interesting point about, the riflemen, and there is a strong history of that. Have you heard of the Appleseed Project?
Yeah,
Are you familiar
actually,
with that
I really
at all?
wanted the time to participate, especially before Obama made the old M1 imports illegal. Because if you did Appleseed and then you did like some other stuff, at least the Texas Rifle Association would give you an M1. So yeah, no, I've heard of Appleseed, which is kind of like what it's also it's a nonprofit that educates you on originalist constitutionalist principles, and then also
Yes.
teaches you how to shoot a goddamn gun, which is
Yes.
really useful.
I've gone to one event myself. It was very informative. They go through the alternative history that you don't get to hear about.
Yeah.
The very beginning, what started the Revolutionary War, basically, and it's very interesting, kind of alternative history. And then they teach you, they teach you how to shoot, and it's a very it's thought provoking. It's very physically demanding, but it was very fun to do. So. Yeah, no, that's kind of.
I'm envious. I'm envious.
It's-
I want the time to do that.
Yeah,
I hope to
they
this
do.
time.
They do them every couple months, like all around the country.
Yeah.
Project Appleseed. So, but yeah, it's just a good 2-day event. It's something that if you're going to own a rifle, if you're into marksmanship, especially, it's something very valuable. I personally think everyone should know how to shoot a gun.
It's a good idea.
It is a good idea. So what was perhaps the most surprising part after you developed the Liberator and some of the media attention you were getting? What was something maybe that happened that kind of surprised you that you weren't expecting?
We'd seen, we didn't plan it this way, but in the run up to the Liberator, it was actually many months, and then other things that we'd released, and I had seen pretty much every species of like reaction at that point. From the look, this guy's a fucking terrorist, like put an into it, to no, regulate the bullets, kind of like technocratic responses, like okay, we can regulate guns, let's regulate the bullets, trying to be realistic. And I guess the biggest surprise from the whole thing came from how they stopped us, because there was no question to me that they would eventually stop us or try to stop us, and it's the bus you don't see coming, that gets you. And they used the military diplomatic bureau of the State Department. They basically ended up using a way of exercising the projection of their power in foreign policy, like to use basically a form of intellectual property, a regime of intellectual property against what we did, to assert control over the information. I hadn't assumed that argument would be one of the first ones they'd make. And in the end, really, the best way to talk about what happened to us is probably to talk about intellectual property. These regimes that have propped themselves up and continue to succeed so well really rely upon the idea of IP, biotech, armament, electronics. When the walls of IP are broken down, it's really a kind of free-for-all at that point. I mean, not much else, but really prop the state up.
Yeah, there is, and I think that's a discussion that's gaining more prominence just among like average people too. You see a lot of, IP abuses. For instance, even things like Apple taking out the blockchain app.
Oh yeah.
Because they, perhaps some people speculate that they feared competition for a currency that they were possibly developing. What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on Apple and their opposition?
Apple showed like its distemper for innovations in payment gateways a couple of years ago. I mean, they at least projected even back in like 2011 that they wanted to be a big player in payment gateways going forward, just like how they had revolutionized music and content delivery. They wanted to be in the payments game too. I don't know if that's still the plan, but yeah, I mean, even that's one of the reasons I switched to Android a couple of years ago, because like developers couldn't even put Bitcoin apps up in the App Store. I think this is still true. So even though the blockchain app somehow got up on there, I don't know, was it a web app or something? Like, I don't know how it got up on there, but yeah, we can just assume that this company, and especially after the Snowden disclosures, full on collusive with the welfare warfare state, and or should I say the surveillance warfare state. So I have no doubt that we would need to rely upon outsiders or dark horse like tech companies to help us advocate for Bitcoin, because Bitcoin doesn't help Apple's ambitions in the payment space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're going to be seeing a lot of Bitcoin users moving away from Apple. I mean, already a lot of them have been, just because of the limitations that were set already. How do you think this will affect mainstream adoption of Bitcoin, though?
You mean that Bitcoin apps can't be in the App Store?
Well, as far as getting people on board who, a large majority of people use iPhones and tablets because they're kind of easy to use.
Yeah, no question. I don't. In the end, I don't know, because even if you're running, so there's a couple of Bitcoin projects now that are extensions in your browser. You can run different browsers on your Mac. You can run Bitcoin on your Mac. You can do it. So I'm not sure that it's really a huge stumbling block after all, more than it's just a kind of signal of the stakes, what we're up against, and of like the temperaments of these large corporate players. They're not to be seen, I think, in the first case as adversaries, or they're not to be seen in the first case as allies. They should be assumed to be eventual adversaries.
So were you referring to CryptoKit just now as far as the browser?
And Spare Coins, yeah.
All right, okay. I haven't heard of Spare Coins actually. Could you elaborate?
It's in San Francisco. Same idea. Just in fact, they look very similar. It's just doing Bitcoin in your browser. Right. Spare Coins is open source.
Awesome. So I'm very interested in Dark Wallet. Could you kind of explain how that project started?
We didn't name it, actually. I think we went with the name anyway, but so Amir and I had like this, I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'll go ahead and explain the name. So Amir and I had this working document, and Pablo was participating on it too, and we had like running titles like Dark Market, or just like whatever. That's what Amir kind of had on it. And I let a journalist interview Amir, and Amir slipped him a document, one of these documents which had the title in it, and this was the guy that wrote for like the New York Post or something. The New Yorker magazine, and he called it, Dark Wallet, and I was like, I guess that's its name now, but which is good because there's a story we can tap into. We can kind of give back to the United States this nightmare that it had, the going dark problem that the FBI would often talk about back in the crypto wars. I'm sure it's still something they talk about now, especially in the 90s. There was the go dark problem, and I know that like Booz Allen Hamilton and other like security contractors have shown the Dark Wallet video and been like, look, like these are the stakes, like it's the new currency wars, so we return to them their nightmare that one day there will be a situation where all the channels go dark. And so it's an appropriate name, I think, even if it's a bit heavy-handed kind of. But Amir and I had been really good friends since Defense Distributed just started. Back in like September of 2012, he invited me out to one of the first Bitcoin conferences in London. I met him there, I spoke about my project, and we developed a friendship. And we stayed in contact through mailing lists and direct email and stuff for many months. And then I tried to raise money in Europe in 2013, and Amir was my kind of like guide through these strange spaces in Europe. Very interesting living with Amir in Europe. But our friendship stayed really good, and I knew at one point we'd want to work together. He felt the same thing. I had a lot on my plate with the gun stuff, but as soon as the gun stuff came out, I had my big legal team, and I wasn't like in immediate danger of going to jail. I talked to Amir. I was like, yeah, let's get something going. So I came out to Berlin in August of 2013, and we arranged the project. Within a month, we had the basic outlines, had the team, and then did a proposal online to raise the money for it.
Awesome. So what are some of the features that Dark Wallet improves upon as opposed to older forms of wallets?
I guess like one of the big risks we're taking is we want to use a more scalable and like not necessarily intuitive, but a more scalable architecture in Libitcoin, like an alternative backend, which is probably the biggest risk that we're taking with the project, because we're going with Amir's Libitcoin and SX commands. So people have to kind of adopt that scheme to ultimately for the success of this wallet. But at the same time, even if that doesn't necessarily work out, we're trying to prove out just like intuitive ways of and default ways of doing deterministic wallets with stealth addresses, and then we think we have a technique for CoinJoin, for mixing basically, which will work well. And like if even one or two of those things work really well and in your browser, because we're going to release it open source, anyone can fork, and maybe it can be a very significant addition, to the ecosystem. So I think there's lots of room for different opportunities. I'm not trying to sell it short necessarily, because especially in the press, I'm like, oh my God, the end is nigh, deal with it. But already I've seen like in the little meeting we had in Milan, a bunch of developers came out, even from the States, and there was a real like consensus about like, okay, this is important. It's important to kind of reassert our dedication to care and for the user and privacy and anonymity. So I think only good things will come from the project. And I'm not trying to act like, oh, this is technically superior to what you're dealing with now. I want this to be like a kind of cultural superiority, not necessarily like technical.
Could you elaborate a bit on the maybe some of the pseudo-anonymous functions of Bitcoin? It's not completely anonymous. A lot of people tend to think it is. It can be, I guess, mostly anonymous, but what are some ways to kind of increase anonymity?
If you should use Tor, but a lot of people don't have patience for anonymity. That's the problem, right? A lot of people don't have patience for PGP. So at the very least, you should use a new address every time you do a transaction. Every time you want to receive Bitcoin, you should. I mean, a lot of the practices come down to most people have used their wallet and like one receive address like the whole time, and it's not too hard after a while to kind of like figure out who you are. And another thing is like different vulnerabilities, even at the level of the operating system, we believe can kind of rat someone out who's just operating like a standard desktop Bitcoin client. So the best ways to ensure that you're doing things are to have like a Tormail account, download Bitcoin on a totally different machine, right? With like a, like not even connected to the network. And I don't know, you got to go do extreme measures to even convince yourself that what you're doing is relatively anonymous. Because even if they find one kind of link in the chain, all right, they can figure out who you are. The best headspace to have is to just go ahead and assume that, if you're not taking maximum precautions, that you're not protected.
Could you elaborate on, you were mentioning a part of the dark wall is CoinJoin. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. So CoinJoin is a big subject, and I admit I'm not on the Bitcoin Talk forums as much as I should, and I just kind of lurk on there. I don't assert my presence, but CoinJoin is like, I think, a really big goal for at least the anarchist segment of Bitcoin. And blockchain tells me they've got a really good version going, they think, and I just think like in order for this to really be a truly libertarian utopian currency, there's got to be this level of fluid kind of mixing going on where you can really have an authentic laundry of what you're doing. Otherwise, everything's infinitely, I mean, it is what some of the zero hedge people say about it, like it's part of the apparatus of your domination and regulation. Like now everyone can see your transactions, So one of the indispensable elements of a free Bitcoin and what we want to do with Bitcoin is breaking up this like forensic traceability of the transactions. CoinJoin is a scheme. I forget who coined the term, but there's all kinds of different papers on how to do it. The one we're using it's a multi-step process, and I think we want to use IRC now in one of the processes as well, one of the steps. But if it's executed in an interesting way, if it's done well, and we can demonstrate that it's done well, I hope that it receives some adoption or some critical investigation.
So it already seems that, at least on the regulatory side of things, that Bitcoin as it is now is kind of hard to regulate, at least, through laws and things like that. You can ban it, but, it'd be hard to prevent transactions from taking place. But what are your thoughts on the direction that regulation is going in, just as far as external, laws?
I'm kind of like with Baudrillard when it comes to just regulation. I don't even believe that there is like a direction. Like the machine just like produces like the dictates of authority, because that's its role at this point. The legislative and regulatory mechanisms are just spinning off into like far beyond us, outpaced. You know what I mean? Like there's regulations you've never heard of and never will. And I don't know. The bureaucratic imagination is so difficult to penetrate. All that stuff's sexy to me too, man. I can't help it. But I guess my thought is like there is no clear intentionality to it. The only thing that introduces intentionality is when someone goes like, "Hey, I'm with the Bitcoin Foundation. Would you like to hear about Bitcoin? Let me tell you about how it works. So, look, we can help you, and like with coin validation, we can help build the software for you to just neatly integrate into your databases, so you can go ahead and regulate while you're regulating." And so it's like self-censorship and the kind of like introduction of ourselves as free subjects of the bureaucratic regime that is so problematic to me. I'm not saying that it's not just a criticism that they're too dumb and they don't know what they're doing. It's that they're like, in the end, you do it to yourself, and this is so infuriating. So I don't know, actually. Like I don't. And it also depends on what you mean by regulate. Like, yeah, of course they can't stop me. They can't like stop me from sending you some Bitcoin, but like they can have a pronouncement on the issue, which is all that's really needed in the end for them to kind of subject me to some type of like discipline or something. And that's, in the end, this is what Snowden was talking about, like the architecture of oppression. It's enough that I violated some rule or dictate somewhere that I don't know about that now kind of exposes me in the event where I become a problem to power or to someone in power. Bitcoin can become one of the available mechanisms to make you vulnerable as a political subject. And that doesn't need to happen, but it might.
And you mentioned coin validation. would you want to kind of, what are your thoughts on that? Can you kind of,
I don't know, God. Everything I hear about it is just like, so, what?
do you think it's something that could realistically be implemented?
No, what I see is like a system of approved vendors and, green lists and stuff, or what did Hearn call it, like red lists, like that kind of technique where we can like, look, you're allowed to do work with these vendors, and there would be like a sufficient enough of a kind of enforcement or surveillance mechanism to make sure that the Bitcoin's going that way, or there might even be like a government approved blockchain or something, or New York is considering a bit license, right? Like, so isn't it amazing too? They even adopt our own like nomenclature, like a bit license, so that you like subconsciously are already ready to like engage and accept it. And it's so fucking insidious. So yeah, my worries are now that top level of like, well, will the scheme work? It's that like, well, that there will be these kind of incestuous like ties with the scheme, and that like it'll work enough or something like that. Yeah.
If it were to be implemented, do you think that would that strike a serious blow? Do you think you'd see people moving out of Bitcoin and into other projects?
Yeah, what's exciting is that, God, it's wide open for any other type of... I mean, I know that they would just apply the laws, like wholesale to all cryptocurrencies, but I mean, people have had a taste of the blockchain as a technology now. Maybe even if Bitcoin is in decline, there are other applications of blockchain. I don't know. So as a pure cryptocurrency, who knows? Surely, yeah, it would dissuade a lot of libertarian folk from using it like they were before, but I think it's here to stay in large part. We just kind of have to nurse it and be much more intentional about how we're representing it or advocating or developing for it.
So yeah, and a lot of people do just have an understanding about Bitcoin that, it's just a currency, but it is so much more than that. There's so many other, parts to the network. What are some of the most appealing traits to you as far as, whether you want to go into like contracts or,
like open transactions and all that.
Yes.
Open transactions is an interesting case. There probably won't be time for like a lot of literature to be written about this phase of the project, but I've heard so much so many lauds of like praise on this project, which is something that people still haven't really, integrated into their lives or anything. So it's like, but it's the great white hope, I'm worried that nothing will ever come of the project, I don't know. I guess I'm excited about the more like local advantages. But I'm also more concerned, right? Like Florida just started prosecuting people using local Bitcoins, and the regulatory apparatus has really kind of stopped exchanges from entering the marketplace, at least in the United States. It might be that, and this has been said maybe a lot of times now, it might be that the most exciting things in Bitcoin won't happen in the United States. They'll happen in other places.
Where would those other places be? Where do you see the promise of Bitcoin to reach its full potential?
Well, there's so many... the trade wars are like not visible to most people in the public, but I mean, there's so many people trying to carry different advantages, and I think, like how Singapore has kind of become like the next Switzerland and stuff. And I was talking with with some financial minister from the Netherlands, and like he wanted nothing but to talk about Bitcoin and like his government sponsoring our project and stuff. And so the system of states is competitive, and like some of these states want to... This is what Snowden had to do in the end. He had to play the big states against each other. So China went down decidedly against Bitcoin, but maybe another state can be a very pro-Bitcoin state. So I don't know. These are still questions yet to be kind of determined. But isn't it like Denmark or somewhere where like 1% of the population has Bitcoin? There's incredible statistics.
And Iceland, I heard recently, Aurora coin was a coin that's developed there, and the creator is giving everyone in Iceland a portion of an Aurora coin.
Wow.
The entire population,
That's
just
really
to
nice.
Get them started on it.
All these new altcoin salesmen. It's incredible to watch it happen.
It is.
And I can't help but like that Doggy coin or Dogecoin.
Dogecoin.
Dogecoin, is that how you say it?
Yeah.
I've never heard it said yet.
And it's being put to use too.
I'm sure it is. Yeah.
Well, Sean's Outpost uses it to feed the dogs of the homeless.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's great, man. No, so Dogecoin is the pronunciation.
Dogecoin.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now I know.
I mean, I don't know that it's set in stone.
Well, I don't know.
That's what I think the developers call it. But I mean, it's kind of one of those things, like Doggy Coin. People know what you're talking about, though. Yeah. The dog, the meme.
Very designed.
Very much secrecy.
No, it's great. You can't help but love it.
Yes,
so,
yes.
I still hope that, so that there are these kinds of episodes in it where that's fun. That's like, but I hope that we don't just take a pure, like, juvenile bent to everything that we do and kind of. But then again, like, maybe the ironic is the last bastion of, like, serious projects. So.
Well, and I think in a way the state really needs to be mocked in some ways, and there needs to be humor involved. And I was
people forget that. You're right.
Yeah, and when Dogecoin came out, I was kind of like, oh man, it's totally like ripping on Bitcoin. Is this for real? And then it turned out to be for real, and I was like, well, I gotta love it.
There was Kanye coin. You saw that?
Oh, Kanye coin, yeah.
Yeah.
Coiny or something.
Or Kanye.
Yeah.
So no, humor was a part of our project for a long time, and it was only very minorly a part of, like, the Dark Wall video. But when we released Guns on YouTube, we would do it with a very, haha, fuck you kind of attitude. And I think that was like, God, it was like such a breath of fresh air to some people who are just so used to, especially your Fox News Republican type, who's just so used to getting, like, beat down every day, told about how much he's getting beat down, and he doesn't know what to do about it, So some people were, like, exhilarated that, like, look, not only are they doing what they're doing, but they're kind of having fun with it. You're right. That's an essential element to these projects, or should be.
Let's see. What are your thoughts on Bitcoin Foundation? You were saying some interesting.
They don't need my help to be like, they're in a full-on decadent reputational space right now, right? Fully every member has got, like, a terrible part of his past at this point. Whether that's terrible in our calculus or someone else's, but interesting how the game they play was to, like, assert themselves as the legitimate ambassadors of Bitcoin, but at the same time kind of mine the legitimacy out of that representation into, like, inflating their own kind of, like, status to Family America, or to just get money, to just get investment or something. Maybe you got to do that. You got to hawk your advantages or something. But it's very interesting. Also, we left a political vacuum. I guess I say that we, as the community of Bitcoin, we left a certain political vacuum, which I suppose will always be attempted to be filled by people. The foundation ran to the front of the line. And it's also interesting that there's this monocultural problem where everybody's running QT, and I mean, maybe it had to be this way for us to kind of break things up, but certainly diversity is a vulnerability right now in Bitcoin. There's these political considerations, but my criticism from the foundation is what it was from the beginning. I encoded it in our video as well. I used a clip from Orson Welles' adaptation of Kafka's The Trial, where Joseph K. is in front of all these regulators, and the regulators look at him. But the whole conceit of the trial is that, well, he thinks that by participating in the process, he can kind of go along to get along. But he thinks, still at the end of the day, I'm going to be able to interface with this process in a way which it will understand that I'm not guilty, and it can recognize me as independent of it, and I can kind of get out of it. But no, in the end, the irony is that, like, his participation in it is what damned him and is what killed him. If he hadn't participated at all, nothing would have happened, we can assume. Or maybe that's too optimistic a reading, but the real irony is that it is the participation of Charlie Shrem, an ex-Silk Road money launderer, trying to now come into the fold, which kind of leads to his damnation. I mean, like, there's all these micro ironies to it, but the bigger one is simply that, like, they promote the conceit that, well, by interfacing with regulatory power, we can prevent the catastrophe, No, you create it.
Yeah, and they try to say, oh, well, we need the regulations to legitimize it. And,
sure.
Which is a ridiculous. Anyone using it is legitimizing it. And then you have things like the, New York Financial Services meeting on it. And that was interesting to watch. And it was very revealing to show, how little the people knew about it that were asking the questions.
What was important and answering. But what was important was just that there be these formalized proceedings, right, as an evidentiary body for the further actions that will come. I'm sure that it was just a ritual of power for New York's sake, because New York is the seat of all financial power in the end, right? And New York will have something to say about Bitcoin.
Yeah. Did you catch kind of like the end? It was Charlie Lee was speaking, but there was also another woman, Carol Van Cleef, and she was pushing this currency.
I saw.
You didn't miss, okay.
I watched part of. I have the website still up on my browser, but the two videos I only watched.
It was
part
very
of the first
long,
one.
yeah.
And I've seen transcripts, and people have taken quotes in the lists and kind of like, but you can tell me where the quote was, and I can.
Well, it was interesting. She was pushing this precious metals backed cryptocurrency that was centralized. That would be, easy to be regulated and fit under all of the, money laundering regulations we have. And she was like, this will be better than Bitcoin. And it was like, dude, that's like a step,
There were
40 years back. Like, that's...
Michael Castillo was one of the journalists there, and, he kind of fed me what was going on. And he was just saying, like, there were no libertarians, like, even invited, basically, beyond the reps of some of these big companies. And just interesting, right? That it was just a pageant. It's a show trial.
Yeah, it's funny that they think they can fix Bitcoin by completely trying to undo all of the things that make Bitcoin
well, that's
what
just
it
it,
is.
right? Like, this idea that, like, well, we can purge from it the thing that is essential to it, of course, and then make it kind of, aesthetically, it's still Bitcoin, fit it back into the status quo. No, look, we have to break that. A lot of people aren't willing to go ahead full on and assume the risk of breaking it, because things will get broken. And there's not a lot of money to be made with that either.
Mm-hmm. What are something that I think is interesting? Of course, you can buy a lot of stuff with Bitcoin, but it's also so subversive. What are the most subversive parts to you about Bitcoin? Cryptocurrencies in general.
Oh,
it
man.
doesn't even have to be
like
Bitcoin.
Cryptography and Bitcoin. It's like the front lines right now, as far as I'm concerned. Of like, where does the young radical wish to go to fight the fight of liberty? Get into Bitcoin, just not even as like a holder. There's so many available spaces and like micro. Oh god, there's so much to do. So and before the Bitcoin stuff, the 3D printing thing was cool. It was cool to find that and like exploit it for the guns and stuff. But it's just wide open right now in Bitcoin. I mean, I don't know. I see nothing but opportunity for people who really want to kind of affect their version of the world, invent the future that that they kind of see. Now it sounds like a PSA or something, but I'm just so excited about it. It captures my imagination, what can be done, and you go back and read the old crypto dialogues and stuff. I mean, man, they all saw it coming, and like, I think the vision's still true. We can see what's coming too. We can make it.
Something I really liked about the Dark Wallet ad was just like, this is the time to completely opt out, to disappear, to completely withdraw your support. And I find that to be so fascinating because, you're not going to fight back against the state with weapons or anything like that. I mean, you can, it's great, for everyone to be armed and things like that, but, you're not going to storm DC with a bunch of AK-47s and take over. Like, it's just not realistic. But you can opt out of it. And that's what I found really fascinating about Dark Wall. Even opting out of, other things in Bitcoin too, in a way that kind of seemed like. So what is, do y'all have a timeline right now for the development?
I think so. This, you'll learn a lot about me with this one, but we'll have it available for download when the ABC piece airs.
Okay. Keep an eye out for that. All right.
We've got stuff we're playing with now. I mean, back in even November, it's very easy to do some of the very basic, components of what a wallet needs to do. Hopefully there'll be enough testing, and I'm just, late March, early April. So,
all right.
Yeah.
All right, I'll be keeping an eye out for it. Any other projects that anything that you kind of have conceptually, maybe you haven't?
Nothing I want to talk about yet.
All right.
You've always got to be thinking. But there is, you said something about so like about armed conflict not being realistic. I think that's true, and like this system understands like material violence. Like it understands someone out in the street with a gun. It can handle that. Because it's force, right? But like but you to retreat, right? But for you to kind of like not,
or to laugh at them too.
That too, yeah. It can stand anything but laughter. But there's a kind of symbolic violence you can do, which it just can't. It can't understand, and that's empowering when you really grasp it.
Agreed.
Any other questions?
I think that's it. Thanks so much for talking with me.
It was a pleasure. Yeah.
It was definitely a pleasure. Thank you. So awesome.